Hey guys, welcome back to this weekly show. I have heard that some YouTube channels have been having trouble streaming, so if you're having trouble, say something. Hopefully it's working out fine though. I'm glad that you could join me. Don't forget always to turn up your quality setting on YouTube, because sometimes it likes to make me into a pixelated mess, even though I stream at high quality. So, just the things that we have to deal with. Alright, let's start out by talking about Madonna. I know that isn't something that I usually bring up, but the New York Times did a display on her, and like a little interview thing where they talk about her, and she is so mad because they had the audacity to talk about her age, and she's 60 years old. And so the point of the piece was, how is Madonna doing as a 60-year-old woman who essentially sexualized herself, right? She acted like, well, a feminist. So take this out. You go, Madonna feels raped by her New York Times profile. See, this is such a feminist thing to throw around the word rape as if it has no meaning. Further proof that the New York Times is one of the founding fathers of the patriarchy, the pop star writes. I mean, if you think about all the different famous women, can you think of anybody else who has spent their entire career, to this degree that she has, sexualizing herself? And yet she's now upset that people are commenting about her appearance. This is, okay, it's just hilarious. I'm sorry I spent even 5 minutes with the journalist, she said. It makes me feel raped. Death to the patriarchy, woven deep into the fabric of society. I will never stop fighting to eradicate it. Eradicate it? She's somebody who has spent her entire career, you could say, selling her sexuality. And it's no longer a selling point, so now she's suddenly all upset about it. Her entire career was, I can remember back in the days of MTV when I was young and they still, played music. And she was there, then, half-dressed, kind of rolling around on the floor and crap, in a bikini. Seriously, her entire career is derived from flaunting a deliberately hypersexualized version of her body and sending that over to men and making money off the fact that men, assumably, like to see it or wanted to see it. She is someone who bragged about how many men she slept with, her promiscuity. And this woman is just a big victim of the patriarchy. If a patriarchy exists, you could say she benefited from it. She benefited from male wallets, from male attention. All of these things. She's never fought the patriarchy. She loved it. But she only loved it when, she was young enough to benefit from people looking at her body. She literally objectified herself for money. You could call her different things for that, but really, that's what she did. Did she ever do anything about real rape problems? Comments on the grooming gangs over in the UK? Ever said anything about that? No, nothing about that. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to lead with that because it's such a ridiculous piece, and she's so ridiculous. I mean, you look at this woman, how are we supposed to take this seriously? She has something to offer. Anybody. She was the inspiration to Miley Cyrus, who has done similar things with her body and who will probably be complaining when she's 60 years old about how objectified she was when she was young. Something like that. It's how these people act, I guess. It's like their entire thing. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Because Trump got Mexico to bend the knee, right? Hopefully, you've heard, but Mexico caved. They submitted to Trump. And we were told that they wouldn't. Top-tier conservatives, supposedly, who said that tariffs never work, told us that this couldn't work. And it did. So, we mentioned this briefly last time. Trump placed tariffs on Mexico, saying they have to do something about the illegal aliens that are pouring into our country, many of which aren't even Mexicans. They're like Guatemalans and Hondurans and so on. They're just like using Mexico as a pass-through country, and Mexico's just completely allowing it. So Trump set tariffs on them and said that it's going to keep going up every single month until you do something about it, right? And suddenly, they decided to do something about it. So here we go. Mexico okays more than 10-fold increase in troops to its southern border. Would you look at that? They can actually do something. Mexico had previously deployed just several hundred troops to its southern border with Guatemala, but has now agreed to a more than 10-fold increase in numbers. Yeah, they're also, by the way, they're also deploying their National Guard throughout Mexico to deal with this problem. It's like suddenly they care when it's their pockets. Remember, you were told that none of this could happen. It couldn't possibly work. But the thing that gets me is this. Here, let me show you. Mexico, this is US news. Mexico freezes bank accounts in widening migration clampdown. They're freezing the bank accounts of people for their alleged involvement in human trafficking. Just think about this for a second, all right? It's not a bad thing, but it means that they knew who these people were. For years, they knew who these people were. It blocked the bank accounts of 26 people for their alleged involvement in human trafficking as Mexico broadens its migration clampdown under intense pressure from US President Donald Trump. They said in a statement it froze the accounts due to probable links with human trafficking and illegal aid to migrant caravans. Yeah, you see, they knew not only who was involved in some of this human smuggling, which is a very real problem with very real human deaths, death toll, but they also knew who was behind these caravans, who was funding it. And they did nothing. As Trump constantly told them, you need to deal with these people, these thousands of people who are, coming through Mexico. And the Mexicans did nothing about it. Well, actually, they said that they were going to do something about it. Don't forget, they said constantly, we're going to break up these caravans, and then they didn't. And then, we constantly let them in and went through a ridiculous asylum process for each and every one of them because we refused to say no. No, you can't come in, because we refused to exercise any degree of force, because I assume somebody in government, maybe Trump, I don't know, but somebody thought that it would look bad politically, so we didn't do anything. And now we actually are. But if they knew about these accounts, then that pretty much means that their corrupt government has been profiting. And I've said that before, I think I said that last week, in fact, that there is massive corruption throughout the government. That's why you need these tariffs, to essentially take away some of the incentive, because they're getting money from these drug smugglers and human smugglers inside of government. They're getting kickbacks for allowing it to happen. Well, corruption is, and has been for an extended period, part of kind of Mexican culture, top to bottom. People used to make jokes about having $100 bill in your wallet to avoid speeding tickets if you go visit Mexico. Now, I guess, it would be considered to be too politically incorrect to say so, but jokes like that used to go around all the time. Maybe you've heard some, I don't know. But, in fact, let me just take you through. I've got more. Yeah, if we step away from the news for a minute, and here we are at the State Department, where we can actually find out what's really happening without, so much propaganda. So here we are. And we've got migration protection controls. This is where it actually gets interesting. The United States will immediately expand the implementation of the existing migrant protection protocols across its entire southern border. This means that those crossing the US southern border to seek asylum will be rapidly returned to Mexico, where they may await the adjudication of their asylum claims. Okay, this is actually huge. Okay, you may not realize it, but you know how all these different places the Border Patrol is collecting people and ICE are holding people, they're overwhelmed, right? They don't know what to do with them. They have this national emergency. We're kind of flooded by people that we don't know what to do with. That's because Mexico hasn't been doing its job. You see, if you've got people coming from, say, Honduras, which is a country that has a lot of problems, well, they're supposed to stop at the next country that is safe. They're not supposed to go hunting for which country has the best welfare. The international kind of agreements are that if you're going to accept people for asylum, you're the country that touches them. You're the first country that is safe, and that's it. But they're traveling through Mexico, they have been, which is considered to be safe, and they're coming over here seeking asylum, which doesn't make sense. And suddenly that's all going to change. Because again, Mexico has been convinced, shall we say, to actually do something. And like I said, the people who are most against tariffs, even on the conservative side, are admitting that they were wrong. Here's Ben Shapiro. Holy crap, if true, Trump was 100% right and I was 100% wrong, good on him. And that's in response to this Washington Post thing about US-Mexico close to a deal to avoid tariffs. Mexico has proposed sending 6,000 troops to its southern border with Guatemala, and what sounds like a modified version of a safe third country agreement. That's what I was just talking about a second ago. So this is actually a pretty major victory, and it hasn't really been covered much, right? The media, which covered it a little bit, like enough so they can say, look, we're not partisan, we covered it. They didn't give it anywhere near as much airtime as they should. I don't think they've discussed or expanded upon any of the stuff that I've already mentioned, because they don't want to. They don't want to give Trump a victory or any. They don't want to make it seem like he's actually a successful president, which he is in many ways, including on this topic so far. This is a pretty major accomplishment for a president to do this, and at the same time coming up with a trade agreement with them too. So there's all that. All right, now let's see what you guys are saying. One track says, first Mexico was going to pay for the wall, now it's 6,000 troops are going to pay for the other wall. Well, here's the thing. You see, I was wondering if we'd have the tariffs like every month increasing, and eventually the money from all those tariffs would amount to enough to build the wall. I thought that would be really funny. But this works for now. I want a wall too, just to be clear. I don't think this is something that can be used instead of a wall, but as well, I think it's great. And there is a problem with the fact that our detention facilities for immigrants are overflowing. There's disease problems that I'll get to in a little bit. It's not practical to do what we've been doing, and we needed like an immediate solution. And this kind of, well, is one to some degree, right? It's kind of a stopgap measure. Okay. Now, let's move on a little bit, because California is going to give illegal aliens healthcare. I just couldn't really make it up, could I? It's like you've got this state that is in many ways impoverished, that has this homeless crisis, that has massive drug problems. Its inhabitants have massive drug problems, that has problems with human waste on the streets, that has rat problems that they can't deal with because they've got garbage that's overflowing, because they've got homeless people on the streets. There's a massive problem, and they're trying to figure out how to get illegal aliens to have free healthcare. No, okay, yeah. Here we are. California set to give full healthcare benefits to low-income illegal immigrants. This is doing the opposite of what we should be doing. This is actually trying to attract illegal aliens, as opposed to, give them incentives to go somewhere else. It's the very opposite of what we should be doing. They released a final draft of the state's 2020 budget late Sunday evening that would expand healthcare to illegal immigrants and cost taxpayers nearly $100 million per year. $100 million per year. I just want to remind everyone that the people there are poor. So poor that you have this, the really rich and the really poor situation like you have in socialist countries. So poor that many of them are on the streets. And you're talking about essentially increasing taxes, because that money doesn't come from nowhere. You're going to have to increase taxes to pay for the healthcare of people who don't pay taxes. Just to be clear to everyone. It's like, where does the state think that this money is going to come from? You've got people leaving California at record rates, even though it was previously a really beautiful state, with a great beach and everything, on beaches. Yeah, People are leaving, companies are leaving. Increasingly they're trying to get out of there because they can't pay the taxes. And when the companies leave, the place is just going to fall apart. It's like, it's not moral to take from those who pay their taxes, who are trying to succeed and do the right thing, and take that money and then give to those who don't. I was speaking to this leftist the other day who acted like it was somehow immoral to not want to be stolen from in the form of taxation. I don't even, I struggle to comprehend that kind of logic that says that it's somehow moral to, have the guys with guns, which is what taxation is. It's government, armed with guns, taking money from those who work and giving it to not only those who don't work, which is one thing, but those who aren't even here legally, who just ran across the border, in some cases for benefits, specifically in California, because that's the place of benefits. They all know where to go. It's just unbelievable. And it's like, I can't imagine, can you imagine being the governor of California and saying, I know we've got all these different problems, but the illegals need some health care? I can't. I seriously can't. Okay. Let's move on. Yeah, let's move on. Because I've got a New York story that's about as bad. Here we are. Elderly man who shot 2 burglars in his home, charged with felony over an inherited gun. So, 2 burglars came into his home to try to, steal from him. He shoots them with a gun that isn't registered, which I'll get to in a second. And he's the one that's charged. It wasn't a stolen gun. It, was probably bought when there wasn't any registration, which there shouldn't be. He inherited this from his dad, and we're supposed to look at this guy as the villain. This is so very warped, is all I can say. Because registration is and always has been a prelude to confiscation. That's why you shouldn't register guns. It's, they do that before they send people with guns over to your house to take the guns from you based upon, a national registry or statewide registry or whatever it happens to be. But what would the legal, lawful thing be for him to do in this scenario? Was he supposed to, get killed? Let his wife be killed? Our laws are supposed to be reflective of our sense of morality. That's what they're supposed to be. We all have the same basic values, and so those that we believe firmly enough are supposed to be written into the law, and that's what it's supposed to be. But those laws are supposed to keep us safer, not endanger us. How can you possibly justify and legitimize this? I can't. William Solomon says nothing can stop a criminal better than a gun. Yeah, and we've seen that most obviously during these school shootings. There is a direct relationship between how long the shooting lasts and how long it is for the next person with a gun to arrive there, that being the cop or the armed teacher or whatever it is. The bad guy with a gun keeps shooting, keeps killing until someone else with a gun, some decent person, steps in. That's what happens. But this story, it kind of reminds me of being back in England with the way they had these stories about, old women who, had a bat and they'd attack burglars with them, beat the guy or try and then be charged. And then there was one story I can remember way back about a guy who held a burglar at gunpoint with a fake gun. And he was charged for essentially making the burglar fear for his life. That's the way things go. Just so you know, it doesn't get better from places like this in New York. It just gets worse and worse. Okay. John Eden says, clearly you're supposed to let the criminals kill you because killing them is morally wrong. Well, they've got this really warped, perverse sense of morality. Those on the left really seem to have this nonsensical sense of morality, and that's why we can't reason with them, because they are just completely unreasonable. Alright, let's move on, because it is only a matter of time before there is an Ebola outbreak in most likely California. I guess it's possible anywhere that we have lots of these immigrants coming in. But I keep seeing story after story. You see, over in Africa, there is a massive outbreak of Ebola right now. For those who don't know, it's a highly contagious, highly fatal disease in which people start bleeding from everywhere. You start hemorrhaging everywhere. So you're bleeding internally, and also you start crying blood, and blood comes out of your ears, and you just bleed to death. It's an awful thing, and it happens pretty rapidly. You go from having pretty mild symptoms like having a headache and general body aches, that sort of thing, to suddenly bleeding out. And in between those phases, like if you went to a doctor and said, I have a headache, he's not going to think, well, maybe you're carrying Ebola and spreading it around to everybody. Because that's the concern, that people will become infected and then will spread it unknowingly. Because who avoids everybody else because they have a headache? You think you're contagious and that you're going to kill everyone who you come into contact with? You don't. Of course you don't. But here we go. 8th person tested for Ebola in LA County is quarantined. We've got all these different stories about Ebola right now. Here we go again. US Border Patrol arrests 153 Africans at Texas border. This is a real problem that is basically being ignored by the mainstream media, but anti-immigrant sentiment, as they love to call it, will surely increase when, thousands of people are killed by an Ebola outbreak as a result of it. So they ought to be covering it now. But like I said, it is highly contagious, and you may not know right away. And there's an incubation period in which between when you actually get exposed and when you first get symptoms. You exposed to somebody who had Ebola, and 2 weeks later you start having a headache. It's crazy. But imagine if the person who was contagious, worked in fast food, for example. You could infect hundreds of people in a day. And then those people would probably impact about 10 different people, in that day. An epidemic can spread extremely quickly. It could be apocalyptic, I guess would be the word, like of biblical proportions. And it seems like almost nobody's talking about it. The media's not like warning that something could really happen here. None of that is happening. And we used to accept immigrants to the United States on the basis that they would help the country. That individual would help the country. It wasn't about helping them. It did help them, of course, it provided them with, in some cases, freedom, in some cases, wealth, often both. But our benefit was important. Accepting immigrants was for us to better the nation, to provide some kind of skill or what have you. You can't help the entire world. And, most of the world isn't in the same condition as the United States, of course. But it was a mutual benefit system. And now, with our current immigration, it's talked about as just like some moral imperative that we have to assist anybody who, reaches the border. And that doesn't make sense, and it's not good for the people here. It's not just or moral to require the people who have paid into the system and for generations built up America into the strong country it is today. And this goes for other countries too, other civilized countries too, that are increasingly letting down their borders and having like an open border policy. It doesn't make sense to say anybody can come. It's not going to work out well. I mean, for example, some of these immigrants, especially those that we're talking about with Ebola and all, are coming from the Congo. In the Congo, right now, the people are concerned about vampires. I'm not joking. They're seriously concerned. That's the state of civilization over there. And they've actually killed lots of people who they think are vampires, especially doctors and aid workers, because they have like needles and stuff for taking out blood, and so they think needles, bloodsuckers, you get the connection to vampires. That's the sort of place that we're talking about. I mean, you know, I can't put this a different, nicer way. Seriously, this is just the way that it is. You know, in some of these countries, rape is used as a punishment. You know, even by like courts, is used by punishment, as a punishment, and you have like forced rape between relatives, otherwise they're all killed. You know, you have to draw the line somewhere as to, you know, what you're going to accept, what is reasonably going to, you know, help the United States to prosper. And I'm sorry, but people from the Congo probably aren't. Yeah, that's just a basic fact. Okay. Alright. And actually, let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got, here's another 350 Congolese migrants arrive in San Antonio. This just goes on and on. And, yeah, they're carrying diseases that, you know, people in the United States have no immunity to. And I'm not just talking about Ebola, I'm talking about in general when you have somebody from somewhere else, they have different germs, different pathogens, and the immunity is built up. In each country, you essentially have collective immunity. People get used to certain things, get immune to certain things. When you have somebody else come over, it may not be the same way. There's been a lot written about that in relation to white people coming over to, you know, America, and the Indians who are here not having any immunity to the same infections. It's the same sort of thing. Okay, here we go. When we called Border Patrol to confirm, they said, yeah, another 200 to 300 from the Congo and Angola will be coming to San Antonio. Again, we're just supposed to think everything's fine. In Japan, they're more concerned about it than we are. You see, they're concerned because they're having like the 2020 Tokyo Olympics is coming up, and they're concerned that that means that they're going to have people from all over the place coming there and potentially spreading Ebola. And so, yeah, they're concerned about Ebola and I think a few others. Yeah, Ebola, South American hemorrhagic fever, which is similar, and Lassa fever. The fatality rate is as high as 90% for these diseases. And so what they're talking about doing in this article is essentially getting some of these pathogens and playing with them in a lab to see what they can figure out as far as treatments. And that's just really ridiculously dangerous, I would say. You know, would you want one of these places near you? If you want something that will keep you up at night, you can look into what happened with Plum Island. And Plum Island was it's officially a USDA research facility where they were playing with serious pathogens. There's a massive history there. And some of those did, in fact, get out. And it's right next to Lyme, Connecticut, just off the shore from Lyme, Connecticut, where Lyme disease was first discovered. So, yeah, there's a whole... I'm not going to go into a big tangent on that, but I'm just saying that I wouldn't want one of these facilities playing with Ebola in my neighborhood. I don't think that you would either. You know, it seems fairly basic, right? Okay, let's move on. Because I discovered this over in the UK, and I know I'm staying on the immigration topic here, but I don't know how I can't. The Daily Mail reported that meat from chimpanzees is being sold in British markets. This is a big deal because chimpanzees contain pathogens that do travel to humans because biologically they're similar to humans. I don't know, it seems almost cannibalistic, doesn't it? Anyway, essentially Africans want to eat this stuff, and none of the articles on it, or very few, will even mention the fact that this is tiered to a very specific population of people who want it. It's not, you know, regular Brits who are looking for it. It's sold essentially amongst a black market. And if we go down here to the end, here we go. It says, from my own experience in Brixton Market in London, all you have to do is ask for some special meat for a special ceremony and you will get what you're looking for. It's a reality that bushmeat, as they're calling it, is being sold on the streets of Britain, and I'm not surprised that it's available in the Midlands. And, you know, you got infectious diseases, foot and mouth, anthrax, Ebola, TB, cholera. Okay, the thing is, this isn't just going to apply to the people who eat the meat, which if it was going to apply to them and they knowingly knew what they were eating, I wouldn't actually care that much, seriously. But these diseases are contagious. So feasibly, the person could eat this meat from, you know, the chimpanzee or what have you, and then, you know, be contagious to other people around him and spread it and get some other kind of epidemic is what I'm looking for, started. And nobody even cares about any of this. It's infuriating that it's not covered like this is a real dangerous thing. And I'm telling you, you know, you've got these leftists who are like going on about how they're concerned about anti-immigrant sentiment. You just wait until they start some pandemic and wait until what the anti-immigrant sentiment is then. Seriously, because yeah, it's not going to go the way that they think it is, especially with them ignoring it all this time. Okay. Hold on a sec. There we go. Okay, let's move on. So, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and show you this one because this is Gab. It says Gab's dissenter web browser was rejected by Apple today. Furthermore, we were banned from our App Store developer account for, quote, objectionable content for a web browser. We filed this information with the Department of Justice and urged them to investigate. Okay, this is, well, I don't know, evil? This is kind of an escalation in the big tech censorship problems, because this is absolutely an antitrust violation, an antitrust issue. All right? Apple is in the position of having monopoly power because people have, you know, Apple phones, and the only way for you to get software onto that phone is if Apple allows it through the App Store, right? They're prohibiting a browser from getting listed. Why? Because they don't want you to have access to Dissenter, which is a comment system for the internet. They actually, if I was a customer of Apple products, I'm not, but if I was, I would really resent them telling me how I could communicate, you know, if I could communicate and with whom on my own device. It seems so kind of audacious, but it's an abuse of monopoly power to say, no, nobody else is allowed to get into our app store if we don't, you know, when you're the only one who can do that. You can't do that. Apple has absolute control over its devices. You know, you could say that Apple kind of makes Microsoft and Google look like choir boys on this issue, because with Android phones, you have to some degree the same system. You do have like the Play Store, but if you want to install something that's not in the Play Store, you can. You can just download the installation file, I think it's an APK, and install without, you know, Android's consent. With Apple, you don't have as many options, so it's like Android is actually the lesser of evils. It's also cheaper and better, but, you know, besides all that. People on the left can't win the arguments, and so they turn to terrorism when it's on the streets, when they're attacking people for saying the wrong thing or what they perceive to be the wrong thing, or whether it's banning people in the cases on the internet with these tech firms. It's all about them silencing the competition, silencing the people they disagree with, because, you know, they're losing, and they know that they're losing, and that's kind of behind their hysteria at this point. And, you know, they were showing something here. This is Gab too. They said, it's not just us. This is what happens when you try to post a link to Minds on its main rival, Facebook. You see a lot of these companies, you know, you gotta prove that you're a human because you linked to Minds.com. It's crazy. A lot of these companies are acting in really, well, anti-competitive ways. They're abusing their monopoly power is essentially what I'm saying. Okay, I'll be right back.
You thought you knew your ABCs and the days of the week. It's time for a real education. Tuesday, Smooze Day. No, there's no Tuesday anymore. It's Sarah Day. Watch Sarah Coyer, the Ashamed Millennial, every week at 10 p.m. on Sarah Day. That's 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 Central Time, 8 Mountain Time, and 7 for the Lost Pacific region.
Okay, I'm back. Hey again. Okay, let's keep talking about tech for a little bit longer, because I have more on this, and they're just like seriously escalating like crazy. So Google was fined in the European Union for actually a pretty legitimate reason. So here we go. Google hit with 1.5 billion euro antitrust fine by the EU. That's about $1.7 billion, you know, for... Okay. And essentially they're saying that, here we go, the tech giant had abused its dominant position by forcing customers of its AdSense business to sign contracts stating they would not accept advertising from rival search engines. This misconduct lasted over 10 years and denied other companies the possibility to compete on the merits and to innovate. Okay. So, essentially, it's the same thing, right? You can't prevent other companies from competing when you have monopoly power. You know, it's fine to compete, but you can't prevent other people from competing, which is the main danger of monopolies, right? That's the main problem, is you can buy up your competition, or you can in some way get in the way and prevent them from competing at all, which is what you see in this particular case. Now, in a lot of these cases, I've thought that Google ought to just get out of Europe. Like, you see a lot of the cases where the EU is telling Google what to do with regard to things like hate speech, this nonsensical idea of hate speech. And that's one of the reasons why they are the way that they are, because they're constantly trying to comply with different European regulations over things like speech. And all that takes is just getting out of Europe. Yeah, you move your offices to the United States, and people from other countries can come there and look at your site if they want. But that requires an acknowledgement that there is something better about the US and US law versus Europe and European law, that maybe some countries and some cultures are better than others. That's not something that they'd want to do unless they be seen as xenophobic. You know, I guess that's the way they probably see things. And by the way, when you've got government telling private companies what they can allow people to say, that's like the definition of fascism, right? When you've got governments, just say that again, you've got governments controlling private companies and telling them what they can allow private individuals to say. That's exactly what you have happening right now with Google, and indeed some of these other tech companies over in Europe. You know, the fascists have always been on the left. You know, these Antifa people like to claim fascist and scream fascist at conservatives, but it's always been their thing. Always. Yeah. And there has been a major algorithm change at Google. And not one for the better, of course. You know, when is it? So here we go. Google's latest algorithm change hurts web traffic for Daily Mail and others. Now, Daily Mail I don't actually like, but they're considered to be conservative by British press standards. Okay? Now, that isn't particularly conservative, I'm not going to lie to you, it's not. But, like I said, by British press standards. And then we're going to go on down. And you see, after the algorithm just took place, yeah, this past Monday, and some publishers are taking a big hit. Most notable among them is the Daily Mail, which reportedly complained about losing up to 50% of its daily search traffic as a result of this update. That's huge. You know, I mean, the Daily Mail is a huge website, and they're losing massive traffic. Their SEO guy at the Daily Mail added that they saw their Discover traffic drop by 90%, and it has not improved. Discover traffic meaning traffic that comes in via search engines as opposed to people just going directly to their site. So that's major. And, you know, they were one of the papers that did eventually report the child rape gangs. Don't get me wrong, it took them like 15 years to report it, so I'm not like saying that they're a great newspaper or anything, but they did report it in the end. Whereas so many just stayed quiet. Even to this day, they just kind of ignored the issue. And that's just kind of mind-boggling. But then you can see that this, here we go, there were some winners too. Sites like The Mirror, The Sun, and HuffPost have reportedly seen big gains in search visibility as of this week. Okay, so in other words, the Daily Mail, but also others, were heard. And they're, like I said, perceived to be conservative. And places that are widely perceived to be on the left, and indeed are on the left, are doing better. Places like HuffPost. Now, you can't have the search engine on Google just say stuff like, well, we're just promoting authoritative news, because the Huffington Post has never been authoritative, factual, or anything like that. So that's not what this was about. This was a further politicization. And I think the trouble is that people think that Google's results are objective. Like, they think that it's a search engine in the oldest sense of the term, you know, an aggregator of the entire web that's sorted by relevance to your search. And that's the way it used to be. That's what everyone thought a search engine should be. I still do. But it's not that way anymore. And, you know, this latest algorithm change is just part of an ongoing battle of theirs to kind of change the narratives, to push down independent people, independent websites, and apparently prop up some of the more left-leaning sources. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but it just goes on and on. And they're actually being sued, by the way, because their conservative bias affects their employees. Here we are. Google can't dodge the conservative employees discrimination lawsuit, according to a court. Here we go. Current and former Google employees say in a lawsuit the company discriminates against non-progressives, can we just say conservatives, on the basis of their viewpoint, and against whites, Asians, and males on the basis of sex and race. Google tried to have the case dismissed, but a judge in California, where political discrimination is illegal, ruled against the company. Is that not ironic? That California is the place where political discrimination is illegal. And so therefore the fact that they're in California is working against them. I mean, the irony is just palpable, isn't it? And I guess California just has law for everything, so it just works out in this particular case. What is going to happen now, though, is that this whole case is going to go to discovery, which means that we're going to get some documents from the inner workings of the company. And we may see documents in which the plans to purge conservatives and males and whites and Asians are put forth. That we actually get to see the documents in which they clearly made these decisions. Unlawfully, of course. Honestly, I think it's just beautiful. And I look forward to it. They tried to just have it just dismissed out of court like it had no basis, and it clearly does have basis. Okay. JW5000 says, I agree it's mostly conservatives, but really at this point it doesn't matter who you are. If you disagree with them, you will be shunned. Well, I think they're trying to create a workplace in which you don't have anybody who's white, straight, or male. Certainly not a combination of all of them. And, you know, that's basically the thing. Joshua Burke says, guess I'm the devil. Like, yeah, if you fit all of those parameters. Okay, let's move on. Because this is kind of a dark topic, but an anti-Trump reporter was charged with soliciting child sex. So, let's see if I can pull this up. Yeah, here we are. Here we are. Well-known tech reporter arrested for attempting to solicit sex with a 7-year-old girl. And this guy, Peter Bright, he goes on and on about how much he hates Trump. He also refers to himself online by the moniker Dr. Pizza, which is certainly a reference to Pizzagate, which, maybe he's trying to mock Pizzagate, or maybe he's just really proud of the fact that he's a pedophile. Remember, Pizzagate was an attempt to expose pedophiles in high positions of power. This guy identified himself by it, had a little emoji of a piece of pizza next to his name. It's like he was actually proud of it. I don't know what's going to come next, the pedophile pride parade. It's probably coming, actually. But, some of what was said about Pizzagate was false. But what remains true is that there are massive pedophilic networks that exist among the so-called elitists of our society. I don't think that's ever, that's not in doubt. But this particular story with this reporter from Ars Technica didn't really make the mainstream news. It made conservative news, but it didn't make the mainstream news. What made the mainstream news was just how bad conservatives are. Yeah, all these different YouTubers and independent people. This is what made the mainstream news. Whilst one of their reporters was going on and was trying to meet what ended up being a federal agent about, to try and have sex with her, this is what the New York Times focused on instead. It is flabbergasting. And these people actually reported on what the reporter did. And they actually report on these massive pedophilic networks. You have to wonder if there's a connection, right? But they talk about the alternative media, like the alternative media is a problem, independence are the problem, that people just aren't watching enough mainstream news or reading enough of the New York Times and the Huffington Post. It's all just so backward. Their problem is that people aren't watching their stuff. But the Trump administration has actually made a priority of exposing these pedophiles. In fact, here we go. This was just released, I think today, by the Department of Justice. And it says, nearly 1,700 suspected child sex predators arrested during Operation Broken Heart. 1,700. This is during a 2-month-long operation. Not years, 2 months, and they found these. Again, 1,700. 308 who produced child pornography or committed child sexual abuse. This isn't a small thing. And I'm so glad that the Trump administration is actually paying attention to it. And I think that the fact that there have been so many arrests are an indication that previous administrations weren't trying. They weren't actually putting the effort in. They definitely weren't trying under the Clinton administration. But really, jokes aside, and this topic also has not been properly reported by those media outlets that tell us that they're the authoritative news. That's where you should get the real information from. And yet they ignore these massive pedophile networks that we keep finding out about. I covered a topic very similar to this one, released on the DOJ just a few months back. We keep getting these different massive exposés of pedophile networks, and it's not reported in the mainstream news. Tell me why that could be. I mean, seriously. Besides complicity on the part of these newspapers. Like I said, they didn't report it when one of their own was implicated. Or when they weren't, when it was massive numbers. Going on 2,000 of them. Okay. Alright. I will say that pedophilia is more accepted on the left, and I know that just sounds really kind of partisan. But the thing is that on the left, it is seen as, pedophilia that is seen as more of a political issue that can be debated. And on the right, it's not. It's just seen as bad. Right? I mean, that's the way that I've been seeing it, especially in the last few years. But I guess maybe you've got one party that it's made up of more or less Christians, or at least people who adhere to Christian values, and the other side is just kind of making up their own ethics as they go along. But whenever you see people defending pedophilia at the political level, talking about lowering the age of consent, all of these things, it's always people on the left, always. And I got sent this article from the UK, which I had to check because I thought, can this possibly be right? And it's all about the Labour Party over there, which is the party that's on the left. And we've got the Conservative Party there, which is not particularly right-wing, but anyway, here we are. So, we can't prove sex with children does them harm, says Labour-linked National Council for Civil Liberties. And here's the Labour Health Secretary, Patricia Hewitt, who is taking this advice. This article, I'm sorry, is just so bad, okay? Childhood sexual experiences willingly engaged in with an adult result in no identifiable damage. This is the advice that was given to Labour. This is who the Labour Party was working with, talking about pedophile love. This is just so bad. Okay, the Criminal Law Commission should be prepared to accept, this is an internal document, should be prepared to accept from follow-up research on child victims which show there is little subsequent effect after a child has been molested. This is so demonstrably false. And by the way, a child can't willingly engage with an adult. There's no consent there. That's the whole point. The child isn't old enough to understand, to consent, to understand the gravity of what they're consenting to. The child can be manipulated, is manipulated. The pedophiles engage in what's referred to as grooming. We know this. This has been studied at great length. And we're just supposed to pretend like none of it exists. This is just so evil. And yeah, you can prove harm. It's been proven for like 150 years, for as long as back to Freud, we knew that this was a problem. Sexual abuse is like the #1 cause of mental illness. And in the cases of this child abuse, you have this problem where it creates a cycle, right? Where the pedophiles now were in many cases abused, sexually as children. Or you got cases in which it messes with their sexuality enough that they're more likely to be gay as they grow up. Yeah, there are demonstrable problems with it. You've got increases in cases of suicides. This isn't even up for debate. None of this is even controversial. The idea that molesting kids is somehow benign? I've never even heard this. Okay. And again, these are internal documents that got released. The real need is a change in the attitude, which assumes that all cases of pedophilia result in lasting damage. This is so sick. I struggle to even talk to you guys about it. It's just like, wow. Now, the present legal penalties are too high and reinforce the misinformation and prejudice. Yeah, we are prejudiced against pedophiles. Yeah, you're darn right we are. And that's not going to change. Okay. Again, this is the Labour Party. Yes, they're on the left. That's not to say that everybody who's like a Democrat is pro-pedophile. I don't mean that. But those who are pro-pedophile are always on the left. And they just seem to have this ever-changing sense of morality that, okay. And this is the fact that the cycle repeats and that it messes with a person's sense of sexuality and all that is one of the reasons that I was really sympathetic to Milo when he came out and said some of those callous statements regarding, I think teenage boys with older men, because it does in fact mess with people. And so, I think he's a victim, and so because he was a victim of it, it makes a person less likely to be able to see it objectively. I think his comments were stupid and, like I said, callous, but he was a victim of it. So that kind of explains a lot. The way his view towards it was kind of warped in an attempt to justify what he actually went through himself. So there's that. All right, let's move on, because just, and pedophilia is an especially big problem in England. It's partly why the authorities turned a blind eye to the Muslim rape gangs. Partly, I mean, there was also the part where they didn't want to be seen as racist, because that would just be the most awful thing in the world. But yeah, pedophilia is actually a really big problem over there. We're moving on. Really, we are. Let's talk about this Ohio college. Here we go. Ohio college to pay $11 million in damages to bakery owners after they were targeted by an SJW campus mob. Now, what I love about this story is that this Oberlin College, that is a liberal arts college that is private. So when you see that $11 million, it's not coming out of your tax money. It's coming out of the money from the actual private college, the money that was given to them by, their alumni and everything else, and, the tuition and all of that. It means that the money actually matters. It actually hurts. I hate it when they're just using tax money because, well, nobody learns anything. Really, it doesn't hurt them. Okay. But anyway, they're getting $11 million because, well, let me first tell you what happened. You see, there were some shoplifters inside of their bakery who tried to steal. The owners of the bakery called the police. What's wrong with that? Well, the people who were shoplifting were black. And so apparently they were supposed to not call the police on the basis that the people stealing were black. That's what got this mob so outraged. You can even make it up. The fact that the bakery owners treated them like they would anybody else who had stolen from them. The alumni should be pretty mad at all this. But anyway, that started this whole, social justice mob thing that happened, in which there was actual property damage. And you had the actual dean of this college who was involved in it, and that's why the college is responsible too. This is the woman that we're talking about. Now, if you look at this woman, just tell me, right? Wouldn't you know, if you saw this woman, that you shouldn't hire her? Doesn't she just have that look? I mean, really? Does she look like someone who would be a source of great knowledge and wisdom? Profound educator. Doesn't she look like that? I mean, seriously, come on. Can't you just look at her and see that she's not the person who should be the dean of your college? Do we have to just, ignore our own eyes? You can see it. Okay, sorry, but you just can. I really wondered for a while if she was transgender or something, but I don't think she is. But with those on the left, we keep getting these instances of actual terrorism. And what I mean by that is, the people who owned this bakery, who were constantly harassed and who had property damage and who received threats, it's a type of terrorism because they were terrorized, which is what terrorism is supposed to mean. And it was done for the sake of pushing a political ideology. It's the very definition of terrorism. And this sort of thing is happening all over the place, and you often don't even hear about it. And those kids were egged on, incited by the college. It's one thing if you've got college students who have had crappy parents, which is common, or absent parents, and misbehave and act wildly and all that. It's another thing entirely if the college is actually encouraging it. In the case of that woman, she was handing out flyers about just how bad this bakery was to try and, cause people to keep going. Because they were racial profiling. No, they weren't. They were responding to an actual robbery. So I just wanted to kind of point this out because it's so rare. Oh, and by the way, the $11 million, that doesn't count punitive damages. They're about to find out how much they get in punitive damages. The jury just decided to go for it, I guess, and really punish this college. We got this little kid who was terrorized and everything. So it's great. I wonder how much the punitive damages will be if the 11 million, just for damages and restitution, all of that. So honestly, I think it's wonderful. It's so rare now that people are held responsible for their own actions, held accountable. So, great. But on that topic of racially motivated charging of someone who committed a crime, well, there's something just ridiculous happening over in Oregon. Let me show you. Here we go. Oregon bill cracks down on racially motivated 911 calls. Victims of those police calls would be able to sue the caller for up to $250 under a measure overwhelmingly approved by the state Senate. What we're talking about here is when someone is acting suspicious or committing a crime, and then some white person calls to report the fact that it's a black person or some other race doing it, they could face consequences for that. And don't forget, it's already illegal everywhere to call in a false report. That's already there. But in this case, it's like you're being punished for being white and calling on another race. I mean, either the person that you're calling about is acting in a suspicious or criminal way, or they're not. You can't prove racist intent. That is like the definition of thought crimes, right? And that's all it is. And, you know, they're talking about these cases where white people called because they saw somebody who they thought was acting suspicious and the person was black and they weren't actually doing anything wrong. Okay. Now, here's the thing. You are more likely to be suspicious of someone of another race. That's actually been psychologically studied. So if somebody is acting suspiciously and they're of a different color from you, even if you're black and the other person is white, you're actually more likely to find their behavior even more suspicious or troubling or worrying or become more fearful. It's actually part of human nature. You feel closer to people who look more like you. That's it. It's not some big ploy. It's, you know, people get nervous when they see people acting in suspicious ways, especially if they look less like them, so you're less likely to empathize with people who don't look like you. It's not some grand scheme that, you know, that there is, oh gosh, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? But this only applies to whites. Do you get that? I mean, really, when they're talking about this, it's racially motivated 911 calls. Like, what is that other than, you know, an anti-white bill? That's really just all it seems like. But again, it's thought crimes. That's what we're getting into. Let's keep going a bit. Hold on a sec. Let me pull up this new tab here. Okay, because I've got some kind of heartbreaking news. I know you guys will be really kind of torn up about it. Top progressive Think Progress site bleeding cash and people. Think Progress, the progressive or regressive site, is running out of money, guys. They're in debt. Isn't that just shocking and awful? I knew you'd be just so torn up. Now, they're $3 million in the hole. So you look $3 million gap between revenue and expenses. Now, how, when you just produce news online and you have almost no expenses besides writers, do you possibly get to be $3 million in the hole? You don't do any manufacturing. I mean, like, what? Is this like just typical Democrats and their economics? I don't know, but the advertising revenue is falling. Pretty much, okay, everything's falling. And they're losing their people too. Oh, the judge said they're canning their people. Now, for the Democrats who are watching this, you know, I'll give you the quick economics lesson. It's really bad if the numbers with the minus next to it are bigger than the numbers that don't have the minus. Pro tip. Okay, but seriously, conservative news outlets over the past couple of years especially have been attacked and blacklisted and removed from search engines or pushed down from search engines and all of this. But it's the leftist sites that are dying of natural causes. You can't say that they've had mass discrimination or they've been pushed down or any of this. That's just not true. In fact, they've been helped, because as other sites are pushed down, they naturally will rise higher. That's, right. And yet these leftist sites keep dying. It's almost like nobody wants to watch and read their stuff. And if that's the case, then how did they supposedly win the popular vote? Without illegals voting? Or without mass voter fraud? Just, asking here. Think Progress pretends to be a news site. It's really heavily left-wing, of course, but you go and it looks like there are different news headlines. Nobody wants to read it, apparently. And, we've had all these different sites like Vox and Vice and all these others that are dying. In fact, CNN is also dying, if you may be aware. No, this just came out. CNN announces more layoffs as Zucker reveals network is losing $10 million a year. How heartbreaking is that? This is what I'm saying. All these different leftist sites aren't doing well. On Periscope, Smile Point says, thank God they're going bankrupt. Yeah, honestly, I'm glad. And they've earned it. Like I said, it's not like they're being pushed down by someone. They're not. If anything, they're actually being helped. They've got all of big tech on their side, and yet nothing. I mean, they're constantly in a state of just plummeting. $10 million a year. And, Fox and OAN are prospering. And, Fox, because it's part of, cable unlike OAN, Fox is more popular than I think all the networks combined, I think. Certainly individually, but I think combined. Again, you have to ask yourself, how can the other side have won the popular vote? I really don't think they did. I don't. You would need to have massive voter fraud because all of the different independent metrics, like what we're seeing here, indicate that conservatism is more popular than leftism, which, thankfully, right? So there you go. That's the layoffs of the week. It seems like I'm constantly talking about how all these different news sites are going down. I think Vice News just got kicked off of HBO. So yeah, it works for me. Okay, I guess I'm probably going to wrap up. If you guys have any questions for me or anything like that, now's the time to throw them my way. Joshua Burke says, saw a CNN poll tonight, they're reliable, that said Joe Biden leads by a landslide in 2020. I laughed out loud when I read it. They're really pushing hard with Joe Biden. I think it's funny because he's this rich, white, straight guy who has a problem with, touching people inappropriately in the post-Me Too era, remember? Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, let's see, a landslide of fourth graders. Yeah, I really don't see how he can possibly win against Trump. I don't. I mean, win against the others, I can actually see that because he is, ironically, the most balanced of them. He's actually the most moderate. And I don't say that to mean that he's moderate and good. I just mean that when you put him up against Kamala Harris and Mayor Pete, as we're calling him, and the others, he actually looks reasonable by comparison. But if you put him side by side with Trump, it's not gonna work. And also, they've got this problem with the brewing arguments within the Democratic Party, between the so-called progressives and the traditional moderates, where if you put Joe Biden up against Trump, I think you'll have a lot of progressives, which is essentially the socialist side, who are just going to refuse to vote for him. And you're also going to have people who refuse to vote for him because he was in favor of segregation at one time. There's a long history of him. That's the problem with being in politics for so long, and with being on the left, and things are ever changing, what's acceptable is ever changing, all of that. So it's going to be really hard for him. Again, he was in favor of segregation. how is he going to defend that up on stage? I don't think he will be able to. That's why I'm still thinking that Kamala Harris will actually turn out on top, because she's got the kind of non-white, female, feminist. I know she slept her way, but okay, all of that. And she knows how to virtue signal better than most of them. And that's what it's about, right? Winning the identity politics thing and virtue signaling and all that. So, Jade Smith says, wasn't Trump a Democrat prior to running Republican? Yeah, well, so were a lot of modern conservatives back in the day. You know, Dennis Prager, who is considered to certainly be a conservative by just about everyone now, was always a Democrat. You know, he just says that the party left him, that his values haven't changed over time, but the Democrats became absolutely crazy and wild. So there's that. Okay, I guess we'll wrap this up. Thanks for coming, as usual. I'll try and produce some more videos throughout the week, and I will, be here next Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern. So, but yeah, on Trump being a Democrat, he was a Democrat before they turned really crazy. They used to at least pretend to be decent, pretend to be sane. Now all of that's out of the window, and I'm glad that they're like forthcoming with just how crazy they are. People like AOC are the true Democratic Party. And what I mean is that behind closed doors, that's the sort of stuff that they've been saying for decades, just not to the general public because they know it's not palatable. Okay, all right. Anyway, we're done. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time. Stop! Don't leave yet. Since you made it to the end, you probably enjoyed that video. In that case, here are some other videos that you might enjoy. The updates link at the top will provide you with better ways to be more reliably notified of new videos, and it also has social media information, that kind of thing. That's because you know how this site is. Well, the link at the bottom, the store link, that's in case you're looking for merchandise or our healthier products. Thanks.